So today we start. It's 1 o'clock. Ahla sahla to CVSP 202. And with this week, we actually move into the material for CVSP 202. The reason why we have to spend some time at the beginning, making sure you are aware that the monotheistic thinkers, everything that you follow today in terms of these monotheistic religions, in terms of their thoughts, in terms of how they try to pass on to you their own views, all of it is influenced in one way or another, some to a greater degree, some to less, by the Greco-Roman world, by the Greek and Roman world. And so we have to spend some time at the beginning of the semester introducing you to the Greeks. And you had a very fine lecture last week primarily on Plato, and that's the main one for now. I will also help you a little bit with Plotinus in today's lecture. But that's just some basic background so that you can read more intelligently and understand a bit more interestingly the world of monotheistic thought. So first of all, we're not dealing with religion. We're not talking about monotheistic religions. We don't have a department of religious studies anymore. We used to before the war. This is not a course in religious studies, and therefore the optic will not be that of religious studies. It'll be primarily an exercise in cultural interaction. That's really what we try to do with these courses, because we have so much and such difficult material to cover in such short time. We do want to do something serious, and the something serious is to help you understand how cultures, a little bit about how cultures interact with each other, how they dialogue with each other, and therefore the main component of, I think, all CVSP courses and all humanities courses, in one way or another, should be to focus primarily in helping you to be a critical thinker. That's the great slogan, but to give it some meaning, basically, to start to give it meaning, we need to understand the word empathy. Putting yourself in the place, in the context of the book or of the author or whatever it is you're trying to study. And empathy does not mean agreement, but before you can seriously dialogue with someone and disagree and agree and give and take and learn from each other, before you can properly dialogue, or all the time when you're trying to dialogue, you do need to get out of your own cocoon and to be able to understand better how you think the way you think, but to try for a while to try to understand how other people think, why they think the way they think. And then you can have a fruitful dialogue. You can see what you agree with, what you disagree with. You can help each other to benefit and help each other to be more aware and critical in examining their own views. But this element is often just passed over and passed by. I know that from my own experience as a student and from the 50 years of teaching CVSP. I'm very, very much aware that that's the missing thing, that's the missing item in helping you to really gain something, not just information. Now you've got the web, you can get all the information you want. Not just to get one teacher's view on things, and that's wonderful, especially if you have me, then you get the full truth. But the point is that in the past you used to have to take 4 courses, 201, 202, 203, 204, so you get a kind of a continuity, a kind of a view of how cultures interact with one another in a more detailed way. And we used to tell people not to take the courses with the same teacher, so you could get 4 different teachers giving you their view. A very rich experience. That's CVSP. That's what CS is meant to be. That's when people talk about CS from the past, that's what they meant. Those 4 courses where you really are forced to get out of your own self and your own self-perspective, and not to lose it, but to refine it, to think about it, to examine it by, airing it out, letting it interact with other people's views. And the missing link always in true dialogue is people don't spend enough time really trying to put themselves in the shoes of the other person, not just simply in our personal relationships and in understanding other cultures of the world today, but certainly if we want to understand things from the past, that you've got to really put yourself into that context. When you try to do that, you'll understand Oedipus the king much, much better than just by looking at it from the outside. You'll understand the Epic of Gilgamesh. You'll understand that even in the earliest works you deal with. And certainly now with the 202, to understand the Hebrew, Christian, and Islamic monotheistic worlds, not easy at all, especially in the highly charged political and military and corrupt world of today. This is a great challenge, but it's a great challenge, it's a happy challenge for people who live in this part of the world, because we're being invited, especially in this part of the world, to really take a look at what this part of the world was famous for in terms of culture and thought and how it influenced others. And certainly the three Abrahamic monotheistic religions, the Hebrew, the Christian, and the Islamic, have influenced the whole world, the whole globe we're in, whether people believe in their beliefs or not. And unfortunately, even the people who believe in their beliefs have not really taken the time, or don't have the time, to really take a look at the richness of the history of each one of these traditions, and the history of their interaction, and the history of their interaction today. Unfortunately, we live in a world, in a consumer world, where we want things to happen quickly, fast track. Okay, you look something up on your web. You need to train your mobiles. Please pay attention to this. Maybe the only important thing I say in the talk. You need to train. Haram. You have the duty of training your mobiles. They're so attached to you. They can't bear being away from you. So you train them by put them aside, put them on silent, put them away, and you'll help them to become mature mobiles that will help serve you, not enslave you. And so, with all this stuff, just to get you into what we're trying to do in a very short semester, we're trying to help you understand how the Hebrew, Christian, and Islamic worlds were very much interacting with each other at one high point of things in history. The three of them interacted very much. And so you had Hebrew, Christian, and Islamic thinkers, scientists, whatever you may think of, working with each other and working on the same Greek and Roman texts together and interacting with each other. This is the sort of thing that one wishes we would have much, much more of, because when we talk about the history of these three religions, and today, André Malraux said the 21st century, this was the cultural minister for de Gaulle, and he was a great novelist and thinker, and he's all right. He predicted that the 21st century would be a century of religious wars. Silly, how do you think religious wars? Wake up, good morning, okay? That's the world we're living in now, okay? And one way is because, and one factor is certainly that the lack of empathy, the way each group just sort of withdraws within itself and sees the others just from what they've been told, or in this kind of negative way, rather than in a critical way. Critical means try to understand the other thing. Why do they think the way they think? What's happening there? But retaining your autonomy, I hate the word independence, nobody's independent, your own autonomy, to really carefully take a look at all of this for yourself, to examine your own religion, your own culture, but also to really understand the others better. Okay, at least you're being part of the solution, not part of the problem of the possibility of religious wars, which are, people don't call them religion. They're not religious wars. They're just humans using whatever happens to attract the most of people to get them to follow them into whatever they want to do. So when you talk today about religions, you've got to not bracket out as much as you can the whole political aspect of it all today. So you can come back and look at the text, look at the best. And that's what the greatest philosophy teacher I ever had always used to tell us. Look for the best in each thing you're looking. Don't immediately go for the throat. Don't immediately go for the easy, the sophomoric. He contradicts himself. I would have, if I was Oedipus, I would have meditated, looked into myself, and I would have realized I was the killer from the beginning, and we wouldn't have to talk about Oedipus. I mean, things, cheap things, quick things. So with Augustine now, and I wish I had the book with me. But with Augustine, since we deal with it so quickly and there's not much of lecturing time for it, the lecture now ought to be to introduce you to the biblical background of Augustine and to do more of the Greco-Roman. Then you'll be able to appreciate Augustine, because you can't just read Augustine without knowing the context. All right? A Greco-Roman thinker, all right? A Roman, a citizen of Rome, born in what is today North Africa. It was all part of the Roman Empire. And he, just to give you the introduction to all of this, and I'll try to go back and do things a bit more systematically, but just to put you into the whole world, because I don't know what one can do in 45 minutes, but more than just alert you to what is happening, the main things that are happening, the main things you want to look for, Roman Empire, global world, so the socio-economic political situation is, you know, analogous to ours today, all right, where people really are sort of flooded with all kinds of options. We're no longer in the nice Greek world of the polis of Athens, a relatively small community, time for leisure, you know, democracy in the air and all of that. Now you've got a global village, you've got the cosmopolis, no longer the polis, the small community, relatively small community where everybody can participate, and you can be a Renaissance scholar here in Athens, and you're a Renaissance man, and everybody is totally involved. So you don't have any sort of nobodies in the polis. Each one is doing what they can do, and they're all trying to, you know, reach this or live this democratic ideal of full participation of all free citizens. You're now in the Roman Empire. The thing about the Roman Empire is that the Caesars, when it became an empire, they imposed one law, the Roman law, over all of what they thought was the whole world, the Roman Empire. And so they gave us order, they gave us law. And this was quite something, you know, the idea of international law, and law that goes beyond just the boundaries of your own city and all of this, is something that affects them. But their culture was primarily the Greek culture, the things that we're interested in. And this was Augustine. He was a teacher of rhetoric, a teacher of philosophy. He was so his mother was a Christian, his father was a non-Christian. Pagan simply means not monotheistic in these terms, believing in something else, believing in the Roman gods, the polytheistic pantheon, the sacrificing to all of these gods, and the whole atmosphere of the Roman religious world was the world he was living in. Christianity had come up now for about 300 years or more, but the Christian was an enemy of the state. The Christian and the Jew, of course, and any monotheist was an atheist. Right? Atheism is what by the way, they accused Socrates of when the Athenians decided to execute him. Anyone who doesn't believe in the gods of the state, the way the state tells you must believe in them, becomes an atheist, meaning not believing in the gods that you're supposed to believe in. So that meaning of atheism is quite important in the Roman Empire. He was very much attracted to the Roman and the Greek and Roman culture and all of that stuff. He exposed himself to practically everything important in his day: Manichaeism, astrology, skepticism, Platonism. And the last thing he wanted to deal with, or thought he would ever deal with, would be the biblical tradition. He read the literature and the philosophy of the Greeks and the Romans. He took a look at his Bible, read it for himself, and said, this does not compare. I don't want to waste my time on the Bible when I have all this wonderful literature. Now, in pious language, his mother, Monica, was a Christian and was praying for him all the time, supposedly. Well, you have to respect people, whatever they do, whether you believe in them or not. All right? But around the age of 30, he met somebody who could explain what this Bible is. It's not just a book. It's the testimony that can be written down of people throughout the centuries, dating back at least to someone called Abraham and Moses, and all the way up through to the new, because this is now the pre-Islamic world, to the Christian, the Christian world. But a book is just a book. A book is nothing until people bring it to life, until people start to apply it, until people start to interpret it. Right? And so when he finally met someone who was at his own intellectual level, who could explain things to him as an intellectual and help him to do that, he started to be able to understand it. Empathy came in. As soon as empathy hits Augustine, because he was a very empathetic man, he was very empathetic with the Manichaeans, who taught that there were two ultimate principles, yani two gods, one good and one evil. And this explains why there's evil. And they did not believe in free will. They just simply believed that there are two ultimate principles, one good and one evil. Each one is responsible for everything good, the other one is responsible for everything evil. And they claimed to be the true Christianity. You say how you have to keep your critical minds open, because today also many people claim they're the true this or the true that or the true that, and they're just packaging their own views and claiming something is supporting them. So Manichaeism, he spent a lot of time with them. The reason why he didn't accept them fully was because of sex. He was, his main human problem, he was very attached to sex. All right, he wasn't sort of a libertine, but he had a mistress, and he never wanted to give up his sex. Well, one of the things the Manichaeans taught, like many puritanic kind of systems, that in the name of truth and enlightenment, they tell you the body is your enemy, and sex is your enemy, and so the ones who want to rise up in the Manichaean hierarchy have to forego marriage or sex. And here, he couldn't do it, and then finally he meets somebody who's one of their main people, so finally he can have a proper intellectual conversation with them, he thinks. And when he meets them, it's kind of like anybody who took 201, it's like when Gilgamesh meets Utnapishtim in that story. But when he meets him, he says, this is wisdom, this is the heights of what you guys have produced, and you want me to join you, so he rejects them on that basis. See, he goes around searching for everything there. He goes into astrology, and if you read the book, you'll find some very interesting discussion of astrology, why he thinks it's bunk. It's not astronomy, it's astrology, the stuff that you can make billions of dollars, getting beyond TV and telling everybody what's going to happen to them each day and what's going to happen to them next year and all of that. And astrology is one of the most ancient religions of the world, of course. But now it packages itself simply as some people have a gift or something like that. But okay, you keep putting millions of dollars into the pockets of our Magnifaras and our Leila, the Latifs and our Michelle, the nice package, the nice astrology industry. We'll read something interesting to let you think about astrology. Well, look for the pages in the book where he discusses astrology. The man had a very scientific mind, a very logical and philosophical mind. He would never accept anything that wasn't like that. So astrology, he spends his time with them, always trying to be with people, empathy. You understand something by living with the people who believe in it, not just by reading a book about them. Because the book might be wonderful, then you meet them, you live with them, and you say, haram. Or the opposite. You might read the book and you might not understand it, and you live with the people and you start to see the truth that's coming from human existential interaction, and you come back to the book and you start to see what the book is talking about, because the people are presenting. Well, this is monotheism. Monotheism is a witness. Monotheism is based on a shahada, witness. And therefore the literature, the biblical literature that precedes Augustine, he's got his Greek and Roman thinking and philosophy. The biblical tradition cannot be understood, the biblical literature cannot be understood except as a witness of human beings throughout those centuries in different contexts, different times, and how they understood what they believed to be the divine, God. Right? And so when you get it into that perspective, and you start to read the early, like Genesis 1 to 11, it is a great piece of literature and philosophy. But when it's read evolution or creation, astrophysics, or what the heck does that have to do with your understanding Genesis 1 to 11, which precedes when you start with Abraham? It's meant to give you a distillation of the whole understanding of what human life is all about, how you're to understand the divine, and how you understand interaction with each other, and the male and the female, and their total equality with their complementarity, and the things that are there. Then the evil is the evil of betrayal. Evil is the evil of a conscious betrayal, not just simply an error, a mistake, a hubris, a hamartia in the Greek world, but sin. Sin meaning you're betraying another human. And certainly if you believe there's a God, you're betraying God when you sin. You're not just making a mistake or breaking a law, then you still don't know what it's all about. You're still, growing up and getting more mature. But the mature understanding of sin and monotheism is there's a God. And that God has created you. And that God is responsible for everything you're getting. Right? The least you can do is try to do what this God is telling you to do for your sake and the sake of humanity, because you are chosen. Every human is chosen to do their best on behalf of God for humanity. And how each of the monotheisms packages it, understands it, and theologizes it. But that's the start of monotheism. The human being, male and female, are in the image and likeness of God. And the male on their own can't make it until they get a female. So you need a male and a female to have humanity. And the meaning of humanity is you're supposed to represent God on this earth. and rule the earth in this way, and deal with each other the way God wants you to do that. That's faith, that's love, that's respecting God, that's fearing God in monotheism. Right? Not the negative understandings that are packaged around, because people don't have time to look into them, so you pick up whatever you're being fed. So critical thinking, one thing, remember, you're not getting enough information to really make up your mind about things, but hopefully you're being challenged to start to think about things a bit more, complex in its complexity, a bit more in its humanity, a bit more than in the humanity we deal with human beings. We go with the abstract understanding of the human. All right, that's what we do in all the other fields. We want specific understanding. So the humanities should focus on putting you into the game and making you the subject, not just the object. We study you as an object. All right, and now you're the subject that is looking at the object, looking at the things you're studying, and you bring your own subjectivity into it. Kierkegaard says the truth is subjectivity, and people still don't understand what he was saying. Subjectivity, not objectivity. In other words, he wasn't not subjectivity. I mean, it's your own fancy or something like that. You have to put yourself into the thing. Nietzsche says every philosophy is the autobiography of a philosopher. So you won't understand Nietzsche's philosophy if you just look at it on the outside. You don't understand it as the expression of his life, his witness. All right? And if you understand it, if you read Nietzsche properly, you'll find him a very fascinating man. He goes full circle back to the end of his life, saying, maybe we need to go back to faith, Catholic faith, because he left his Protestant faith. But Nietzsche, of course, is always read superficially. So when you read Augustine, this is his autobiography, and so he's written many, many works. And his works have influenced all of thought and philosophy and society and politics and that ever since. In the global world we live in, since the whole Western European Islamic part of it is so important in the global world we live. Right now we're being open to other cultures and trying to understand them and appreciate them. But what makes the world you live in today primarily is this fusion of the Greco-Roman, because the Greek wasn't Greek as we understand Greek. The Greek already was a fusion of stuff from North Africa, from Persia, from all over the world, and it was all distilled into what we think of today as Greek. Okay? So the Greek encounters are much richer than one usually expresses it to. So when you read Augustine, it's an autobiography. Right? So it's not one of his theoretical works where you can really just take a look very simply and clearly, what's this argument he's giving, and let me argue for him or against him or something like that. It's an expression. And it's meant to be let me just get to some of this. Right? This is just to show you some of the effects of monotheism on global. This is some of the greatest art that we look at and has influenced all of art that came after it, came from the monotheistic world. The whole notion, of course, of Adam and Eve and the male and the female and what is their relationship, and it's always going in one way or another. It's always going back to that the first chapters of Genesis, that the male and the female are in the image and likeness of God. There's no male chauvinism, or there's no patriarchy, or it's a synthesis of two becoming one. Tawheed, you see, monotheism. We always think of monotheism as a religion. So the heart of monotheism is uniting, bringing people together. This is why they're not a mysticism. Mysticism is you uniting with the whole, as an individual. All right? In monotheism, it's you and your other people uniting with God together. That's the full experience of the spiritual experience in monotheism. Yeah? Mysticism has its own world and its own understandings, and we'll have Sufism in this particular semester, and that's interesting also. But you lose the point when you get into mysticism. You lose monotheism, because mysticism is just uniting you, one person, Wahdat al-Wujud, right? Cosmic consciousness. You lose individual by that. You find that may be the truth. No one's telling you whether it's truth or falsity. It's to understand the difference. Don't let them all melt into one another, or you'll get Manichaeism again, right? Where monotheism becomes two gods, and you can actually accept it as monotheism. Right? So that's the world you're living in is a very challenging world. Monotheism, Tawheed, the Tawheed people. The Tawheed just having a spiritual unity, but that's much harder to give your life to doing what you can to bring unity to people. And as you do that, supposedly in monotheism, the people, the saints and all that in monotheism were not just simply mystics. They insist that it's only when they were doing that they had the full experience of God. only as they were actually giving their lives to other people and trying to serve them. And in that, the experience of God became full and whole, and they start to understand what God is, not just in their prayer or their mystical experiences. So notice these differences, because they're all being melted into one, just like in Augustine's world. Could have become, Western monotheism could have become Manichaeism. Right? And scholars have always said that if it wasn't Augustine's influence in the West, there was a serious danger there. Because Manichaeism was becoming so popular and so all that it could have become the true Christianity, the true monotheism, in other words, of the West. It could have been that. So this is something important. Notice what he does in his autobiography is primarily, this is Noah's Ark, CVSP biography did not apply. That's very important. Okay, so Abraham. This is they all trace themselves back to Abraham. Why is it called Abrahamic monotheism? And why are they called the Abrahamic religions? All right. In a more technical term, you have the Mosaic religion. You know that. But what unites with the umbrella over all three of them is the Abrahamic and the father of faith. Because this is where you understand what faith means and love. All right. Faith and love mean that if somebody has been so wonderfully good to you and trustworthy and done nothing but wonderful things for you, and you're living in Iraq in a polytheistic world, and this God comes and tells you, now sacrifice your son. You wouldn't be, a philosophy student today who would say, that's immoral. I know that it's immoral to kill your son. Out of context, no empathy, all right? In Mesopotamia at the time, in the world of polytheism, it was the normal thing. If you want to show your true loyalty to one of these gods, you would sacrifice your son to them. So he was not being asked to do anything outside of the context. All right? That's one of the reasons why he does it. But the main point for monotheism is that this was an example through witness and through embodiment, and an existential example of that when you're looking for the divine is not interested in your killing anyone. And certainly not killing your children. So all these polytheistic practices, which some still go on today, all right, where your human sacrifice, thankfully we don't hear about it much. It happens it's still happening in many dark areas there, but even in the middle of America, in the middle of Europe, people are still doing that, sacrificing to Satan, and Satanism, for those who believe there's a Satan. So the Abrahamic thing is, this is what you need to focus on when you want to know what the monotheistic divine is like. Not like the polytheistic world, not just like the mystical world, but the world of trust, and the world of love, and the world of gratitude. Right? And so you don't have faith unless you're living love and gratitude in the way you're dealing with. So in the biblical world, it tells you the devils believe. The devils believe there's a God, but they don't have faith and love in the sense here. So faith has so many different meanings that one has to try to focus a little bit about what is the speciality in these Abrahamic religions. But number one, it's a sense of recognition, a sense of rationality. I can trust this person. If I'm to think about it, this person has done nothing but good for me. All right? So if he's asking me to do something, and now I know he's much greater than I am and he knows things better, it's not that irrational to believe him. On the contrary, it's more rational to do what you're being asked to do. And of course, in the Abraham story, if you're living in the polytheistic world, it's just, it's sort of normal. Yeah, just like they show their loyalty to this God or that God in that way, I'm going to show my loyalty and my gratitude, my recognition, my faith, my trust, my love. Love is giving back what you've been given. Love is not just wanting to possess and parole, I love you, show me, how did you show me? The demonstration of love, the giving, the part, the sacrificing. Right? There's no love without sacrifice. There's no love without gratitude. There's no love without recognition. There's no love without empathy. Right? So this is why Abraham has become such an icon, like Socrates has become an icon in philosophy. For other reasons, if he practiced what he preached, he was ready to go and take the injustice rather than himself, but the wasta, and accept somebody to come in and do something for him. And so he lets the Athenian democracy, the corrupt democracy, assassinate him. in the name of democracy. So these models that you get, Prometheus in tragedy. Right? Tragedy teaches you be like a Prometheus. Okay? Don't be waiting for the gods to do something about you, because in that world, the world of tragedy, the gods are neither rational, the rational gods are the philosophers, nor the monotheistic gods. The gods are these gods who never help you, and you don't know what they're going to do, and they have favorites and things like this, but you don't trust. So what can you do? Well, you be a Prometheus, you be an Oedipus, you be an Antiquity, you be a Gilgamesh. All right? That's your model for how to live. You conquer absurdity. You conquer an irrational, unjust world. You be rational. You be just. You be moral. You do something for mankind. You steal fire and then get your liver pecked away every day in the Prometheus story. All right? And Oedipus giving his life to save the polis in the way he does it in that story. Or Gilgamesh, risking his life just to see whether we can do something about death. In the tragic world, they're never rewarded, but what they do is what's great and what helps mankind progress. So in that kind of a world, or in the monotheistic world, the Prometheus, the Socrates, here the Abraham, and the great people in the whole of the monotheistic tradition, they are the models that one can look at and gain something from each one of these models. All right? And then you choose, wherever you are, whatever you find. This is the autonomy, this is the critical thinking, this is the personalizing of truth that should be the focus of humanities, because you do the specialized stuff in all the other departments, and the university is becoming kind of a factory to give you a degree so you can go off and help in the GMP and increase the gross national product, and you're becoming the dehumanization notions there for 150 years at least. So this is the heart of the monotheistic world that is now influencing Augustine. It's got the Plato on the one side and the Platonists. These are the people he really he finds that this is what I've been looking for as a philosophical standpoint. Not that of the Manichaeans, not that of the astrologers, not that of the skeptics. He comes to formulate his understanding of his own humanity in answer to the question of the skeptic. Even if I am the skeptic says, how do you know it's you that's here today? And when you walk outside, how do you know that what was happening there is still true, because memory fades. And you can never be certain about anything other than what you're immediately, I'm touching this, okay, I can be certain. I'm not touching it already, I'm not quite sure of what it was. Okay, the skeptic tells you your mind is so limited that it can never be sure of anything. Okay, he lived with them to try to see, how, he comes to the conclusion, even if I am deceived, there's one thing that I cannot doubt, and that is what? Even if I'm deceived, there's one thing I can never doubt. Anybody did Descartes 1300 years later?
I think therefore I am.
Yes. With no credit to Augustine, of course. He studied Augustine. They don't like giving credit to anybody before because they want to, everybody wants to think for me, I just come right out of the stars somewhere and not give credit. Like Francis Bacon says, we've learned nothing from the Arab science. Whereas so much of the Aristotelian and other things have come into Europe. So what is Europe is a mixture, a wonderful mixture of many cultures, in fact. So when you think of Europe, this is a Eurocentric view of things. Rubbish. Okay, the so-called Eurocentric vision is already a fusion of many cultures that once you understand it can help you then to fan out into all the other cultures that still need to be understood there. There's no, there's this sort of these slogans that have, caused us to lose our ability to appreciate what has been happening, what is happening. So basically Augustine then, in this world of the Greco-Roman world, discovering now the Bible and Christianity, started living with Christians and Christians who were intelligent, who could understand, who could see their life, who could do all this. Okay, at around, in his early 30s, he accepts finally. But once again, the main problem is sex. Okay, he realizes that if you're going to be a monotheist, usually, monotheists follow basically the things in the Ten Commandments, that, adultery is a no-no. Of course, nobody understands that the point of adultery is you're betraying and breaking up the unity of a unity. That's what adultery is. It's not just doing something, having sex with the wrong person. It's the sin in adultery and the so-called Ten Commandments and all that, because they're all part of that. That's what sin is. When you commit adultery, you're breaking up a family. You're ruining children's lives. All right? You're breaking up a unity. All right? The first unity in the monotheistic scriptures is the unity of the male and the female. They've become so one that the male leaves his ashira and everything else. You know, today, when you get married, sometimes in certain parts of the world, you know, and you marry, the wife is now a possession of that ashira. Well, they tell you, Genesis tells you that he leaves all that, and they become one body. Tawheed. See, the Tawheed notion is much deeper than just, do you believe in one God or many gods, or, you know, what the numbers are, or which one. Tawheed is the heart of life, human life. We want unity, we want peace, we want harmony. We don't want this stuff. You know, we don't want all the stuff that's happening. But then we have to take responsibility for it, we have to really see deeply why it's happening, and then we have to live for it. So if you're a monotheist, that's what you should be living for. The unity of the human race. But not by imposing it with one sharia or one religion or something like that, but by taking the spirit of these great people throughout the centuries that have kept monotheism alive and live it in your own life. That's monotheism. This is what Augustine discovered. And so, in terms of philosophy, discovering this in his own life led him now into much of the stuff he writes in books 7 and 8. The whole notion of the will. All right? The Greek world had taught him to appreciate reason, and to see the difference between truth and error, and rational and irrational, and things like that. Wonderful stuff. Can't go forwards without that. But he now saw it simply as a tool now for really understanding life. Life has to be understood in practice, in life, existential. And so Augustine is one of the most important precursors of all existential philosophy in the 20th century. Because he's a Christian, often he's ignored by people. But people who understood him well, like Karl Jaspers, he tells his fellow agnostics, he says, you know, don't not read Augustine just because he's a Christian. You know, this is a very deep thinker. How has he mainly influenced philosophy in the focusing on the will? In terms of philosophy now, forget religion. The Greeks have focused primarily on the struggle between passion and reason. All right? The appetites, the emotions, are the irrational part of the human being. All right? And the rational part, that's the true human being. All right? But you know, in this other aspect, of the non-rational aspect, you can't just put it all into one thing. There's the will. All right? And why is the will so important? Because for Augustine, the will is what finally gives you your identity. Who are you? You are finally the one who gets things through reason, who has emotion, who has desires. All right? You get all of this, but then as a free creature, it's up to you to do with all this whatever you want to do. That's your free will. He thinks that that's simply something that you cannot deny in life. You can put all the all the proofs for determinism that you want, and you get more and more sophisticated the more you have things to be sophisticated with, but it misses the whole point. The whole point of the will is that's where your freedom comes in. Is when you, with everything you have, with all that's determining you, with all that you're given so much, the more you start to be able to make use of what you're given, and you can now make use of it destructively or constructively. This is the message of Genesis. All right? When you do things constructively, you're in a paradise. When you start to do things destructively, little by little you ruin the universe. And so original sin, which, you know, don't think you understand it, no matter how many books you've read of theology. He formulated the term of original sin, but what he means by it is what he says in this book. The original sin is the desire to not accept the light, to not accept the truth, because it doesn't suit you. You want to be your own God. That's why you should have had some biblical background, chapters 1 to 11. When God creates the human being, male and female, he puts them in this garden. The garden is a picture, of course, of paradise and harmony, and everything is hunky-dory, and there's no evil in it yet whatsoever. And there are all these trees, but there's one tree that they're not supposed to eat. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And the serpent tells them, if you eat of that tree, you'll be like gods. So the temptation to be your own God is the heart of the problem of humanity. As soon as I'm to be my own God, I don't care about the rest of you. I'll make use of you. But I'm God. You know, you're my stuff. And so the protection in monotheism of your becoming under such a horrible curse of there are many gods, the mafia, the bosses, the ones who sell us bad medicine today, the ones who don't let you do what you want to do when you do get into a certain place, all right? The gods control us, all right? But we can fight, we can rebel, we can reject. That's Gilgamesh and the Oedipus. But primarily the desire to be your own God. I'm going to set the standard of morality. I'm not going to live by, why shouldn't I kill if it helps me? Why shouldn't I steal? Why shouldn't I cheat? You know, I set my own morality. I'm moral because I don't do this and this and this, but you know what, I cheat here and I kill here and I betray here and do that. I want to set my own. It could be much nicer than that, but just the whole point of not accepting your equality with every other human being. Not accepting your equality with every other human being makes of you want to be your own God. And it can take many forms. All right? You find it in the philosophers and their elitism, all right, and Plato and Aristotle. In Plato, only very few people ever know the truth of goodness. Aristotle, well, you know, most people don't even deserve to be, they're not worth being immortal because, only the philosopher who's developed their rational soul is all that. Habibi, that's very nice and there's a truth in it, but Habibi, you're missing the point of life and humanity. From a monotheistic point of view, we reject it. But we should try, each view we're trying to look at, let's try to look at it from within, not just from what we wanted to say or try to kidnap and make it our purposes or reject it on whatever basis. Every time a human being stops trying to maintain that view, that every human is equal to me, whether they're handicapped, whether they're whatever, they're a human being. Just to be a human being is to be in the image and likeness of God. Therefore, when the prophets come to the people of Israel, one of the things is, you are sacrificing my children, because they like the polytheistic world, it's more fun. And so they start worshipping, once again, these other gods. And so the prophet, more than one, comes and tells them, you're killing my children. They're not your children. You know, when Gibran says, our children are not our own, he was very good at taking things from everywhere. And letting us here adore him, because he's from my village, not just a Lebanese. So he is the greatest. But when I look at him critically after studying all this, he has nothing original to say, and he doesn't give credit to many people, like most of us. But and so his point is nice. The West loves him, and they're reading the Prophet and all of that. But you've got to develop a consciousness of things that are not as simple as they seem. Everything I tell you now, you've got to obviously not just simply believe. It's to stir you to think about these difficult concepts. So the notion of being your own God is the heart of monotheism, of Tawheed and Shirk. Shirk is not just something external that polytheism in Islam, all right, or idolatry in the Ten Commandments, all right. The Shirk and idolatry are happening all the time. That's the temptation. That's the original temptation and the original sin. All right? And it was working at the beginning when they gave into it, and it became part of our human life. That's the meaning of original sin as a theological concept, as understood by most Christian thinkers in the world. Apart from all the silly arguments with one sect and another sect, and one theology with another theology, and selecting some things from here and some things from here. Go back to the sources of things to understand what they mean. The original temptation in this whole of the monotheistic world of Augustine is the temptation to be your own God. This is pride. Right? You can be proud in many ways, but the ultimate pride, and so sin has to have this element of pride. You cannot go to hell if you don't do that, by the way. So those of you who prefer hell, because sometimes they show you how much fun it is down there. But you cannot go to hell in a serious monotheistic perspective, in thought and that, unless you seriously reject God. Not just if you don't believe in something that's being handed to you, or you haven't been exposed to anything serious. But when you reach that point, you see you're doing that all the time, not just in a monotheistic world. You're doing it all the time, every day, every moment. There's this temptation to be your own God, not to respect the other, not to put yourself in the place of the other. Forgive me, but I don't want to forgive you. Forgive me the way I forgive you is the heart of the New Testament. Don't forgive me if I don't forgive others. That's the heart of the Lord's Prayer in Christianity. Every day the prayer is, don't forgive me unless I forgive. And so, how many this is part of monotheism. How many people in monotheism really practice that? But the heart of it is we want to be our own God. I want to be able to forgive me, but not you. I want to get into this course, but don't let him in. I want to get this, this, and that's a temptation. Temptation is good because you discover your freedom in temptation. But then, what are you going to do with that temptation? Is what the story of humanity. Those, we are all parasites living on the sacrifices of people who have taken things seriously all over the planet and everything they do. All right. Now that's what's in front of us in terms of the monotheistic message, in terms of all the messages, the tragic message, gradualistic message, whatever. You are responsible for what's going to happen today and in the future. Don't just look at the past and blame them and the politicians and so my parents' fault. Okay, learn from that. Now you are free. Do with what you have your best, and then you'll understand what original temptation is. You'll see how every moment of your life you're being tempted. And when you give into it fully and knowing what you're doing, like Adam and Eve did supposedly, because supposedly they had full consciousness, they hadn't experienced evil yet, right? They were fully aware. But the temptation to be, oh God, in the Christian literature, in Milton, in his Paradise Lost and all of that, Satan says, I will not serve. All right? So this is the satanic element. I'm not going to, you're all here to serve me. All right? And that in one way or another. So this is the heart of stuff that's usually, covered over. Into philosophy, therefore, comes now the need to focus more on the human will. Not just on human reason, not just on facts, not just on technology, not just on all the stuff we look at in the sciences and in astrophysics and all the stuff we look at. All very good. But it's not there that you're going to understand your humanity, the humanity. You're not going to understand your personal existential reality, except insofar as you start to deal with these challenges of, that you get from the tragic and the rationalistic world, if you took 201, and now from the monotheistic world. Now, let me just flick through some of these in whatever time I have here. I really can't do what I want to do. We used to do what I'm trying to do today and Augustine in 3 lectures, but you don't like lectures, so lectures are being dispensed with. Now I have to do in 1 lecture what in the past I had the luxury of doing in 3 lectures so I could get through to it all. I just want to put some basic things in there, let your teachers take you wherever they wish to take you. Moses and the great art that has come from these, not just that. This is, there's some things with Greek Orthodoxy on Mount Athos and Egypt, St. Catherine's, St. Anthony's, Coptic Orthodoxy in Iraq. But Iraq is still there. I'm not sure which of these were destroyed by Daesh. The Nineveh, Armenian Christianity here in Lebanon and in Armenia. All right, the Vatican and Roman Catholic. The Roman Empire, the background here shouldn't reach the Christianization. It should reach the beginning of the Christianization with Constantine, where supposedly this emperor has some kind of divine vision where he sees a cross and he says, in this sign you will conquer. All right? And so he goes off to this very difficult war and battle and he wins. And so he concludes from that indeed, therefore, the Christians were being persecuted as enemies of the state all through up to his time. He legalizes Christianity. So Christians now are no longer automatically, to be allowed to be, you can kill them because they're illegal, they're atheists, they're whatever else they're doing. Okay. So, but the Christianization of the Roman Empire never really happened, but it became more and more influenced by Christian thinking as the centuries went by. But this is where Augustine now is. He's around this time where no longer is he an enemy of the state. He's living in an empire where he can do what he's doing legally, but he's in a very turbulent world. These are just some of the people here then in 202 will be coming into the Islamic portion. And I don't have time to go into any of this detail. I would love to, because each of these slides one could say very interesting things about. Okay, this is then you go into 203 and 204 into beyond monotheism there, the Reformation, Shakespeare, the scientific revolution, modern philosophy, Descartes, Locke and Hobbes, government, Bentham and Kant, and the whole question of morality and other stuff. Goethe and his great Faust, the French Enlightenment and Revolution, okay, Industrial Revolution, Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times. This is all what's waiting for you if you continue to take 203 and 204. Don't just take the one Marx and Mill. Darwin and myself, Nietzsche, Freud, Couch, okay, me again, this, gender studies, Albert Camus, what a shame, he died, he was a great thinker in the 20th century. Samuel Beckett, Edward Said, and Orientalism. This is the whole of CVSP, in other words. And these are there just because, we want to see values embodied in people and in societies if we're going to take humanistic views seriously. Now, all of this is on the web. If you wish to go on to what other stuff would be of use to you, it's all on the web. It's more specifically about Augustine now. And if you or your teachers wish to make any use of it, it's fine. Otherwise, thank you for those of you who stayed. And I do need to have my sheet.